So let's just go around and kind of share the things that you all talked about. I'm going to take some notes just for me to again get a feel for where everyone is, and then also as each group is sharing, if this wasn't the piece that you discussed in your small group, feel free to add in other things that you might be thinking about at this point. So we'll start with our first group that was talking about all the things that you know about Oregon Go.
I'll start. So like I told them, I don't actually work at a university, unfortunately. I'm trying so hard. But my boyfriend and both of his parents work at App. And so I have sort of a general knowledge base of everything that they do. So Matthew works in the IT department, the student walk-in center. So they fix computers if students spill something on it or they get a virus or something. So that's sort of part of the student services department. And then his dad is the director of advancement services. So he distributes all the monetary gifts that are given to the university from the donors. So that's an interesting aspect. And then his mom is she works in academic policy and procedure. And so whenever a department wants to make a change to a course, whether that be the title, the number of credit hours, the description, anything like that, all those changes have to go through her. And so that's an interesting piece from an academic side, and how it correlates with the staff side and the sorry, I lost my train of thought. The academic side and how it relates to the back end side is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, that's good. There's a lot of, you highlighted a lot of the behind the scenes pieces. So it's like kind of how the sausage gets made, so all the things that are happening that students rarely see outside of maybe the IT support pieces, but knowing that sometimes it takes students a while to realize that there is a whole IT department, or there is a help desk or a self-service tab, or that you can do kind of remote access to fix any kind of tech stuff. So yeah, that's great. Other things that come up from y'all's conversation about things about governance structures, policies.
Yeah. There are two of us in the group that know community college systems, and one of the things that we noted was how student performance and the outcomes that the students have are tied to the funding. Mm-hmm. So especially like in the basic skills, where you have to show that the students are meeting the goals before you can get the money in order to continue the program. And how dependent not just the community colleges, but any public schools are on the money that comes from the state. And it makes it very difficult to plan far ahead when you don't know what your budget's going to be next year or tomorrow.
Yes. Yes, the funding structures, which you all will get into when you get to finance next semester. But yeah, those pieces about how decisions are tied to funding, sometimes more so than the research of the data, or what's the best way to serve or the best decision. So we'll talk about those pieces as decision-making pieces. So yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
go ahead, Jose.
Kayla and I mentioned Kayla, she was in the group. I think we have kind of a close correlation. Something that we both kind of understood was the student affairs, student life sides, and people of work in housing and residence life. Yeah. But even more than that, something for me personally was retention. Because I think up until like recently, from my understanding, is that a lot of people traditionally have seen student affairs as something that's just like sometimes a stepchild of higher ed. And so I think now when you mix retention into the conversation, it makes you kind of see like student affairs is not just activities. There's actually intentionality behind it, and what we do, the work that we do, but also like, the work that we do is a learning experience. And so it's not just everything out of the classroom. It holds its own merit in addition to the work of academic affairs or other divisions on campus. But something that I read in the community college text, even though I don't work at community college and I'm going to tread lightly, But it's like there's a conversation between open access or access in general, and then the right to fail. So it's like I work at an institution where a lot of our students are low income, first gen, and it's like, you know, sure, we're admitting students, but beyond the acceptance, how are we, whether that's student affairs, student life, academic affairs, no matter what your role is at the university, how are you contributing to student success? And so that retention piece and the student affairs and life side really spoke to Kayla and I.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing I would like to add from my perspective as well, from Meredith College, we have a lot of certificate and other types of programs that they talked about, like with the lifelong learning and continuing education. We have a lot of that at Meredith, and I actually have a non-traditional student as a resident assistant this semester. So that's been a really interesting experience to be able to get her full-on perspective from being a non-traditional student living in the residence halls and getting her bachelor's degree. So I have some experience in that section as well.
Great. And that's another piece that, or a couple pieces that came out of that, is that idea that there's learning that happens beyond the classroom. And so how are we valuing that in terms of how we're allocating resources, how we're hiring and training folks to do that work in those spaces. And then also the notion around like the purpose and the missions of organizations, which we'll get into in a second, is that notion that, you know, we have structured in the U.S. higher ed system or the U.S. education system that folks have, you know, a right to an education K through 12, and anything beyond that is a privilege. And so that notion of the right to fail, like you mentioned, it's that notion of we have a responsibility to provide access, but we don't have a responsibility to like guarantee completion in the same way that we do to students in like the K-12 system. So how all those things where, you know, we are giving all the resources to students to make them successful in the K-12, like you have to ask for those now when you're in the higher ed sector. And that's a shift that we don't often talk about, I think, enough for students as they're transitioning. But then also like there's the pathways to that are laced with bureaucracy and hierarchies and policies and red tape. And so we'll talk a lot about that and how we are of service or not of service to students. And so again, to your points around supports and structures, retentions, and all of those pieces to really focus on the student. It's really good. Cool. Anything else from the first group? I think, Amanda, you had at one point, I saw your kind of jump in.
I was just letting everybody speak. I've been in the community college system for quite some time, and dealing with the data side of things and software for the other departments. I've gotten to know the structure of many of the departments on the campus very well because of things we've had to implement or data we've had to pull. I know in some of the reading we've been doing, iPads has come up quite a bit. I'm very familiar with iPads from an institutional research point of view. So yeah, the data behind what our departments are looking for is critical in going out and getting those students and getting that FTE, which is what we all strive for, so we can keep our jobs. So yeah, and even the basic skills and the continuing ed, like Chris talked about, huge right now with workforce development and just trying to pull those students in. There's such a high percentage of our students right now is just continuing education students. So
yeah, that's good. That notion of having data to inform our decision making and not just letting it all be on the whim of whomever is in a position of authority is really key and critical to how we make change in a systematic way. And also then provide rationales, justifications, advocacy for those different approvals that might come from a more ground up level rather than top down perspective. So
yeah, and our president is really key on data driven decisions. that's what he uses to go out into the community and get the funding that we need. Because as you know, the General Assembly right now still hasn't approved what they're going to do for community college staff as far as raises. And so it's a little frustrating right now because we're not allowed to purchase anything until they make their decision. So
Yeah,
we're kind of stuck.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that we'll dig into is looking at kind of starting from the examples of what's going on in the North Carolina structure, but also I'll try to provide some parallels of how things do breathe a little bit differently in other states, just for comparison's sake. But it's gonna be really cool that we've got such a mix of folks from the community college and the four-year institution sector, so we can get some real life experience of like what's really living and happening now. Because again, I have a very like limited scope, right, from where I sit. But knowing that we've got other folks in the room that can speak to those other pieces, I think it's gonna be really great as we move through the semester. So cool. Any other things folks wanted to share out about what we know and like generally speaking about Oregon Gov? And this can be from your group or from other groups.
I just was going to say in our group, I was talking about how I work in recycling at UNC. And so most of my knowledge is from facility services, which I think is kind of a unique perspective, I guess, somewhat. And it feels like sort of a unique view on the university. We serve the whole university, but, sort of from a somewhat different perspective. It does have its own kind of bureaucracy and way of doing things. And then also just sort of how being in recycling within facility services, we're kind of unique within facilities in that we have an operations component where we, actually do the physical labor of picking up recycling and doing all of those things. But then we have kind of the education and outreach, behavior change, advocacy portion of our staff that is we're really the only people in facility services that do that work. And I think for the most part, the rest of facility services doesn't really kind of get it. And we actually were talking a little bit about how, a lot of other universities structure that kind of work differently, either farm that work out, they separate that out into the sustainability office. It goes into, more of an academic department rather than in facility services, or they split it up into housing and other, places. But, at UNC, it's all still under facility services. So it's an interesting mix, and there is often some tension there, but hopefully for the most part, it's that tension is invisible to the university community. Yeah.
Good. We always want to hope that like whatever's happening again behind closed doors or behind the curtain, like doesn't impact what's happening to those that we're trying to serve from the community facing side of it. So sometimes it spills out and we have to quickly pull it back together. But for the most part, there's always going to be a little bit of disconnects and rubs and things like that. But good. Cool. Let's move on to second group. What are the things that we don't know about organization and governance?
So I'll start us off, and we talked about a few different things. Kind of the theme towards the end is that we don't know what we don't know. To an extent, one of our other group members worded that, and I think that just perfectly encapsulates like this sense of there's things that you didn't even realize were possible to learn that we're learning, even just in reading these 2 chapters on community college. But I think one of the big things is just how the political side of the community colleges in general, just like the board of trustees and the different ways that the president can come in or out of power in a university or a college. That's one thing, that I think most of us agree that we don't know a whole lot about how that all works. I know we had some people in our group at UNC where they have the chancellor, and different schools have different titles and different things, and probably different levels of power, but yeah, so the kind of the political piece is one thing that we don't know much about at all.
Yeah, just following up on what Andy said, like we were kind of talking about how, so I'm currently working at UNC and we're in the middle of a chancellor search. And we were talking about like where the board of trustees comes into that, and like how the board of trustees gets the power that they have. And it was like, what do they really do, and like how do they really affect the university? Because like we were talking about it, like are they the ones that appoint the chancellor? But at the same time, UNC is doing this chancellor search and there's only one member of the board of trustees that's on the search committee. So it's like, what are they doing? What are they here for? How do they help? How do they hurt? Like what is their role? So we can like kind of dive into that a little more.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of those things that we'll definitely get into and spend some time talking about, those like trustees versus board of visitors versus board of governors, and what do these names mean. And if you leave the state, all these same terms take on different meaning outside in different systems. So yeah, we will get into that and have a session or some activities around like investigating those structures and what that looks like and how that plays out. But yeah, you're right. There's also a lot of things that you might not even know that you don't know. So other things that folks in general, either from this group or across the room, already know that they don't know.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I already went.
Okay. So kind of piggybacking on the Board of Trustees, topic, the Duke Board of Trustees are doing open forum meetings starting next week. Next week they're going to go over the strategic task forces, and then there'll be another meeting in October to go over what they did in the September board meeting, because they meet, I guess, trimesterally throughout the year. So that's just something new that they're doing, and I'm excited to go, at least see the first one and see what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nice that they're opening the door, so to speak, right? Because a lot of times these conversations are very cloistered, like they're very closed off. I know here at App, I always generally forget when like the board is meeting, like until I'm trying to park and I realize that half of a parking lot like near the building is closed off. Like I'm like, oh, okay, it's a meeting weekends, like, and it usually falls on a game weekend and things like that. But that's just me being disconnected and knowing that if there are announcements going out, they're not coming to the faculty. So that's an interesting little nugget about, was that strategic? Is that not? But that's just me, I guess, questioning things. But so I think that's really a good opportunity to participate in that, to really understand and see that they're, opening the doors on how decisions are being made and what their role is. And hopefully being open to feedback and conversation, and not just, one directional communication, and also not just a come and watch and listen and not actually say anything. So hopefully there's some good engagement that happens in those spaces. So that's really cool.
Well, I've seen one of how like the board meetings are conducted at UNC, but unfortunately it was kind of like one of those come in and watch type thing. It was like more of like a town hall meeting. Like there was the panel and they were discussions, and you had your moderator, and they would call on the people to talk, and they would discuss certain matters that were like pressing issues. But it was more of like the audience was just there, like as like the fourth wall. But it was good to like see how they conducted the sessions, and have their name cards in front of everyone, and they actually live streamed one of them too. So depending on like when like it was taking place, or if like the issue that they were discussing was more pressing to the student body and the community, then they would like offer a live stream of it. So I thought that was nice, but not all of the meetings are.
Right.
Sometimes you just get a summary. Sometimes if they, they'll give us a summary through the email. So being able to see how that works was pretty nice.
Yeah, That's good, because a lot of times I will sometimes read those minutes like that come out, and it'll say like the topic, and then it just says like discussion ensued, and it's like, well, that's cool, but what was said? Like, can I get, you know, a little bit more than it was discussed, and then here's the decision if there was a decision point, or like a lot of times there isn't an action item from that. It really is just like a point of discussion. And it's like, well, I'd like to know how folks were feeling about this, and what does this mean, and what are we going to do with that? Like, it's not, I'd like to know more than the minute. So again, I think that's really cool when folks open those doors and let folks into the behind the scenes of what's being discussed.
Well, it seemed quite a bit. The one that I went to, it was a bit friendly, like, because there were like some people that were leaving and different changes of position, so they were allowing people to like say their goodbyes, and then they would be like, well, thank you for your service. It was a little formal, but they were also a little nice.
That's good. They'll probably never open the door if they know there's like a point of contention on the agenda. That won't be the day that they have the open forum if they know it's going to get heated. Like, but you never know. Oh, and then Jacqueline shared in the chat that there was a live stream of the Silent Sam decision. So yeah, I'm sure it was real interesting to watch that interaction between the former chancellor and the board of trustees. So maybe I stand corrected. Maybe they will open the door on the hot button, but I think also that's a particularly notable conversation that a lot of folks were invested in seeing the outcome. So it is probably wise that they open the door now.
They did, but they weren't too happy about it, because she was going to retire at the end of the year, but after she announced her decision, they like made her step down in like January.
And we'll get into that. and there's a lot of, it's like a blessing and the curse in some ways. It's like there's a lot of good stuff happening in the state that we can talk about to illustrate how all this plays out. That also means that there's some really interesting stuff happening that
it's not necessarily good, but it's juicy to talk about.
Exactly. There's a lot of fodder for conversation coming out of the state right now. So yeah, thank y'all for sharing. So let's move to the last group in terms of what we hope to discuss this semester.
Okay, well, one of the things that I hope to discuss was learning more about the decentralization of like the student services. Like, I know in like chapter 1, it gave the explanations of the different like operations, but I was wondering like who decides, like, because like at the bigger universities, you know, everything can't fit into one building because of like, just because there's too many people and stuff to serve. But like who decides like where everything is, like which part of the like governance decides like the placement and when everything's going to be like divided? Because I know like you have the cabinet and the president and student affairs and your business side, but I didn't see where like those decisions are being made.
Yeah. That's good. We get into that. Other things.
I'm gonna go. I know I'm not a part of that group, but something that I don't understand, or I don't have a lot of knowledge of, is or like the like nonprofit and for-profit schools. So like I don't have a previous frame of reference because I work at a public state institution, but like what do those colleges do? Obviously I know they offer like programs, but like pros and cons and like their operations and the differences and things like that. Like differences just beyond like the funding and how they distribute that funding, like what makes them unique and things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Another thing was like, I know that the community colleges base their needs off of like the their mission off of like the needs of the community. How does the college like find out what the needs are for the community that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, that's good.
So part of what Jose was talking about is what we discussed a little bit as well, how schools are funded. I know that when I was doing my undergraduate, part of the decision, I was accepted to Winston-Salem State, to Garner-Webb, and to UNCG. Garner-Webb had the human services program I was really interested in, but it was going to be $5,000 a semester. UNCG was like $1,200 a semester. So you're looking at a lot of their funding in a private school is going to come from a higher tuition. I guess that's from a simple point of view, or maybe not knowing everything, but that made my decision for what school I was going to go to. I could have got the loans and the grants to be able to attend Garner-Webb, but it would have taken every bit of it. At the time, I was a single father. My daughter just moved out here recently, so a single father working part-time, and it was not practical or feasible for me to be able to attend Garner-Webb. So UNCG, I thought I would get the same education, just as good from a public school. I know that we offer, we also talked about the different, the physical layout of a school and where certain departments are and how one might be across the campus from the other. And it's been explained to us that we're trying to end the silos of not just the physical, but the communication aspect of being able to communicate fluidly through the different departments. And so here recently, they're trying to move a lot of the same departments, the financial aid, admissions, records, student success, into the same building at the community college I work at. And it seems to be working pretty well. They're in the department I work in, we're not eligible for federal financial aid for the students. It's continuing education. So a lot of the classes are self-pay, and they may only be a couple of $100, but even that's unaffordable to some of the folks who are wanting to take these CNA classes or phlebotomy classes or welding and whatnot. So we have scholarships that have been set up by local businesses. So there's an electrical lineman program that's very popular there. They train the folks who go out and fix the lines during storms. Well, Duke Power and Pike are funding that. Bank of America are funding a lot of it. I put a link up also on the chat page where it shows the Board of Trustees, and you'll see that a lot of the Board of Trustees are local business leaders. So a lot of times you're going to look at what your community needs is what businesses are in the community, and they're bringing, hey, we need this. What are we going to do about it? What kind of policy are we going to implement to make sure that the folks that we need to hire for the welders for the Deer Hitachi plant, or the tellers for Wells Fargo or whatnot are going to be here for the folks. And I think the largest employers in North Carolina are in education and healthcare. And so definitely we have 2 hospitals here in Winston-Salem. So we're definitely having some help from Novant Health, from Baptist, Wake Forest, fund a lot of the things as well. So I think with the public institutions, we're looking for a lot more money from the folks in the community. And I'm not sure if that's the same at private institutions.
Yeah, a lot of things that happen in different ways that are similar between private and public's community colleges and 4 years. So we'll start to see those crossovers or those parallels the more that we go through the course. But you bring up some really good pieces around funding, structures, intersections, that all the different factors. You're already hitting on those pieces around where the internal and external forces are that are driving decisions that are happening in our institutions or in our systems across the board. And so that's awesome. So we will hit on a lot of the things that y'all have touched on or asked about as we move forward, but also knowing that there's going to be a whole bunch of other stuff that you haven't even thought of yet that we'll also cover. So any other last minute things that folks want to add in terms of burning questions, things that you have like an inkling about, but you still want to learn more about? Other, like, just one more call for other things that folks are already thinking about as you started to read and consider these topics.
Sorry. Go
Or I
ahead.
don't know who that was.
It was
Was
Elizabeth.
someone talking other than me?
Yeah,
Go
we
ahead.
had dueling microphones, but we'll go Amanda, then Elizabeth.
Okay. So I'm just excited to see what the emerging trends are. You know, towards the end of that second chapter, it talks about how those are coming in like chapter 12. And I know we've kind of plateaued with our growth with community colleges, and it'll be interesting to see kind of what's coming and what new ideas are coming. So I'm excited about learning about that. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I would be really interested in finding out what universities are doing to keep their faculty and their staff up to date on what the latest trends is, whether that be that they go to conferencing, that they do continuing ed, that they, whatever that may be. That aspect is really important in my job, which is not educational. So I would be interested in knowing how that same sort of platform relates to the education field.
Yeah, and so thank you for all of those pieces and all the things we've discussed, because things that aren't naturally woven into the text, like I'll try to carve out and slide in either as like special topics, I guess, maybe like on our asynchronous weeks, and I'll like record a short lecture or video, or I'll pull references and post those through As You Learn As We Go, in terms of like, hey, this came up in conversation tonight. Here's a resource for folks that want to dig into that, or here's access to this piece if you want to learn more about that. So definitely thinking through, there are some things that are already, I'm hearing you all talk about those questions that I know we talk about in the curriculum class, we talk about in some of the other courses that you'll take. So I won't go too far into the weeds with some of those pieces, but give you enough to weigh your appetite, I guess, or get you really thinking about it. Also, any of these things that we've talked about tonight, or that we talk about in the first half of the class, like, you all are welcome to hold on to those pieces and save them to really dig into in terms of your final papers. So all these pieces, if you start to feel like, hey, I really want to know more about like what this is and how this functions and what the impact is on all these different layers of the university. And so always, kind of every week, almost be journaling or thinking about what are the things that are standing out to you that you can't kind of let go on. What are the things you're left wondering about after class that you want to just start like quick Google searching and seeing what comes up. So that can also provide you with options for things for you all to dig into in that final assignment. So before we get too far into like the next pieces, I'm going to go ahead and pause us now for our break. And so we'll take, we'll start back up at 7:30, or once I see everyone's videos back up, if you all come back before then. And then we'll start talking about missions and what that looks like in terms of how that controls our decisions and our purpose and why we're all here. So take 10, and I'll see you all back at 7:30. So the first thing I want to do is really talk about mission statements. I think I love mission statements. I think they're really interesting research pieces. If you look at a folks' mission statement, you can learn a lot about where people are coming from. So in general, we'll just start with some opening questions, like, what is a mission statement? How would you describe this to someone maybe outside of higher education?
It has the principles of what the institution is striving for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's how the process, it's how the community college reaches their long-term goals or aspirations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it could be just as simple as who you are and what you want to accomplish. Too.
I think I would say that it would be like the vision of the community college, or well, of the institution, so it's other higher ed, for what their vision is. for their community and students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So all of that is correct because you'll see, and I've got this illustration for us that a lot of mission statements will try to do all of those things. And at the end of the day, like really what we want to see in that mission statement is kind of that clear piece of like their why, kind of like, why are you here? What are you about? So it describes the institution's purpose. In some ways, it can be aspirational, but it really also demonstrates what the institution is committed to. So it's those pieces of, while there might be some visionary striving components to it, it also talks about kind of what they're already doing, how they're doing things, as folks were sharing, and also why they're doing the things that they're doing. It's foundational to the priorities. So even if it doesn't communicate all of the priorities of the institution, it's what's undergirding all of those espoused priorities. So when we start talking about strategic plans and asking questions about funding and allocation of resources, generally the mission is going to be that piece you come back to that's going to dictate all those other things. So it's the thing I say that all things flow from and align with the institutional mission, right? So it's that starting point of whenever we need to make a big shift, if we want to ask that question, like someone gave the example of trying to move all of like similar departments into the same location. So bringing together your registrar and your financial aid and like admissions or other pieces that are entry points to the institution, like, or for students, why not have them all in the same building rather than having to send students all across campus to find one answer, or, you know, take this form around to 5 different departments to get it signed and then bring it back so that we can actually put you in the class. Like, how is that of service? So when trying to, again, provide rationales for decisions, coming back to those institutional priorities and the mission statement are always a good place to start. So I like to use this particular graphic to really illustrate how all of these guiding principles, is how I'll refer to them, really work together, right? So is anyone familiar with Simon Sinek and his text or his TED Talk around Start With Why? Somebody's shaking heads. No. Okay. Well, fun fact, I'll post a link to that TED Talk because it's really interesting. It's really quick. But he has this whole kind of theory around, from a consumer standpoint, you know, folks don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so giving the analogy around, you know, there's this golden circle where the outermost circle is your what or your what's. So maybe it's the product of, you know, we're educating students if we put it in an ed context. Then you've got the inner circle, that's the how. So what is it that you're doing? What are the experiences you're creating for students while they're there that would make them want to maybe come to your institution? But ultimately, folks want to align with the why, which is the central integral piece of the puzzle. And so that's what's dictating outwards to the how and the what. So the fact that, you know, we don't stand in line for the new iPhone or pre-order it, or, you know, log on at 7 in the morning to watch the live like delivery of what's new that quarter with Apple because of what it is. Like, we don't really care about the phone because now there's a million smartphones to choose from, right? It's the why. It's something about what that company is about that those of us that adopt these products, like myself included, that we align with, because of why they do what they do. Something about us then is reflected in that, and that's why we choose to align with them in some ways, for the most part. This may have been more true back in like 2009 or 10 or 11 when he first wrote this from the Apple as an example. But at the same time, we think about our purchasing choices, the brands that we choose to support or not. I know people all the time will say like, well, I will shop at this store or I won't, or, you know, I really believe in supporting local businesses, so I won't buy anything from Amazon, and I try to find everything close by. Like, all those decisions speak to something about us. So like what we're doing or how we do something is integral to what our why is. And so the same, again, holds true for institutions. So the mission statement is our why statement for an institution. It's that overarching commitment reflecting the primary outcomes that we hope to provide for students. So at the end of the day, we know that we want our students to have a certain type of experience and come out in a certain way, so to speak, in terms of how they're going back out into the world. We are committed to these particular outcomes in terms of their ability to contribute to the global citizenry, their ability to have the tools and skills to be hireable, whatever those outcomes may be. It's usually going to be somewhere in the mission statement. Then we have the vision statement that if I were to redesign this, I've used this graphic for a long time now, but if I were to redesign this, I would maybe have it kind of on the side. I'm pointing to the screen like you can see. Can't see my head. Having the vision over here somewhat, again, it's coming and extending from the mission as opposed to falling down, but at the same time, it's off to the side in this way where it is that aspirational piece. So it's that thing of if we achieve all of the goals, what would we look like? So if you've ever done any brief motivational interviewing, there's that question that we always come to of, if you could wake up to tomorrow and the situation was changed or your life was different, what would it look like? That's kind of the vision statement. If we could snap our fingers and make our institutions anything we wanted them to be, what is that? What is that thing? And so it should always be something that's striving. That's usually where you get a lot of the flowery things that you see on marketing and branding things for institutions. But at the same time, it can be really practical because at the end of the day, you still want to be moving towards that vision, right? So it's that kind of big, hairy, audacious goal that we're still striving for, even though we know it's something that's going to be very off in the future that we're moving towards. Then we have our values. So those are the things that are very much tangible in terms of guiding our actions and attitudes and decisions. So it's informing the how piece, I think, of how we do our work. So while it's down here in this third position, generally when I talk to folks about evaluating institutions as workplaces or helping students make choices around where they might go for another degree or a future search of some kind, I'm telling them to look at that mission, vision, values. So while it might be third on the totem pole, it's still really up there with those guiding principles of what's really important and core to an institution. Then we have our goals and objectives. So here you might see the term objective used interchangeably with goals, but the bite-sized piece of how we achieve the mission. So it's that roadmap to the journey or on the journey to your vision. And that's where the goals fall. And then you've got your outcomes, which are your measurable pieces. So you think about from a smaller perspective, these are the tick boxes, the measuring sticks, the things that okay, how do I know that I achieved my goal? Okay, I've met these 4 outcomes, and therefore I know that I've hit that goal. So again, you might have division or department level goals, and your outcomes are going to be those measurable pieces. But ultimately, all this is going to track from that mission. So none of the things that are at these lower levels should be out of line with the mission. So if our mission is to be of service to folks in the high country, our goals and outcomes shouldn't all be talking about having a global recruiting and supporting international activities or only reaching folks that are across the globe, right? And that's a horrible example because there's ways and reasons that that still could be serving a mission. But you understand what I'm saying. If our mission is about here in a local regional institution, we want our goals to match that and say okay, so how are we being intentional? Our goals to be of service in the high country, maybe our goals are aligned with mentoring programs, support programs for the high school, early intervention programs in the K-8 system, or training for teachers to then serve in rural areas, things like that. Those are the things that are going to be more in alignment with a mission for that example. So again, we want to think about when we are looking at mission statements, asking ourselves various questions around trying to figure out what is the mission saying about an institution. So overall, we think about purpose of higher education and asking different parallels. So again, there's things that came up in their readings, asking those questions of, at some point, we were service-focused institutions. So asking ourselves, you know, always who's being served, who's doing the serving, and to what end. So what does that look like for a particular institution? All of these questions should also be answered in a mission if it's a service-focused institution. I forgot to say, I'll post the slides either before or after class each week. So for folks that are taking notes, if you miss something, don't worry. I'll make these available to you. But generally, missions can be clustered into two types. So we've got research missions. Those are things that are coming out of the kind of pre-industrial German states and thinking about teaching, but mainly as applying our research to that. And so there's that really seamless connection that everything that we're doing on one side of, like maybe in the classroom, is really going to be based upon some sort of research or to a research end. I think nowadays we have these dichotomies around research versus teaching where the research is somewhat divergent from our teaching, and that can be really dangerous. So I think in the early stages, they were much more closely aligned, and we've kind of separated those out a little bit more. And again, as you may have seen in reviewing anything around the Carnegie classification system, that's probably played a role in it. Also, again, capitalism. So the fact that, you know, we're all trying to fund ourselves in different ways and creative ways in the advent of grants. And a lot of grants, you're not getting grants for teaching innovation. Usually you're getting grants for big research things, and that's what's bringing in the multi-million dollars that are helping sustain our institutions. And so that focus on research and a research mission institution is going to really prioritize that. But you still can ask the question, you know, who's being served in a research institution, and what kind of service are we providing? Then, of course, we've got institutions of the teaching mission. So this kind of more emerged in the Middle Ages, where that foundation, it became the foundation of what we see now in that liberal arts education, the general education idea that's turned into where folks should have a broad foundation of knowledge and then also have a little bit of that specialization towards the end. So how we kind of have structured, you know, a lot of times students are working in their first couple of years on their gen ed requirements, and their second two are in their major. And so again, the focus is on the teaching, the classroom experience, and a more broad perspective and a broad concept of knowledge acquisition, rather than the more focused pieces where you're learning for research purposes and learning in a more specified field. So again, these two kind of categories then become almost the foundation for our Carnegie classification system. And so the facts and figures article kind of outlined that basic classification measure, so you can see what the breakdown is. So in case you were unfamiliar, a lot of times when we look at our four-year institutions, folks ask those questions, or they make decisions around, is it a research institution? Is it a teaching institution? What tier or level is it? Is it an R? You'll hear people talk about, is it an R1, an R2, an R3? Is it a master's comprehensive? Not knowing that then there's a tiered structure in that based on size, number of degrees awarded, and all of those pieces. And so the fun thing that I think plays out in this system is when you have the alignment between an institution's mission and its classification. So we're going to kind of dig into that and really explore what that looks like and what that means and what can happen. But before we get into activity, are there questions or observations that came out of the facts and figures article, things that I can clarify for folks in terms of what was being highlighted and how that classification system kind of functions? It's a really kind of like technical report, which isn't super helpful all the time, but I chose this particular piece because it shows kind of how your classification can change and how it can change from year to year and the numbers alter. So if you haven't yet, I would also point you all to the Carnegie classification website, where you can kind of look up all of the classifications for different institutions in case you're curious, but it also gives more of the overall summary information of like how the classification system is defined, what the definitions are in terms of each level. So great question, Rick. App State is a Master's 1 institution. So as a Master's Comprehensive institution, we are a teaching-focused institution. And so the classroom experience, the teaching focus is, there's resources are pooled towards that to support the teaching mission of the institution. And then we're M1 based on the number of degrees conferred and the size of our enrollments as well. So within the Master's Comprehensive category, there's like M1s, 2s, and 3s. And so 3s are, they get bigger as you go.
Dr. G, I do have a question. How often does that report get updated?
That's a great question. I think it's like every 4 or 5 years. So there could be a more updated version out there, and I apologize if I linked you all to an older version. But because folks, the rankings don't change that often, they're not updating it annually. Because again, it takes a long time to move the needle, so to speak, based on, again, enrollments, degrees awarded. If you're growing programs, like just adding one new program won't change your classification. So I think about here at App, we just started and just finally approved and launched our Doctor of Psychology program, so the PsyD program. And so now we have 2 doctorate programs, or 2 terminal degrees are offered here. And so while that's great, that won't change us to an R3 or a doctoral level institution. I think there's more that we have to have more than just 2 programs, and also be graduating more than a handful of folks every year. So it's about the degrees awarded too. So because it doesn't change that often, that report doesn't get published annually. I think it's more than that. But good question. Cool.
Dr. G. I have a question about what do they mean when they say one university is represented as different entities? I think at one point it said in 2010, the University of Phoenix was represented as 74 different entities in 1 year, and as 38 state level institutions in another year. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I'm remembering correctly, I think it talks about, well, let me not get to mine. Let me go try. Let me pull that up real quick and see exactly what you are referring to. And if you'll remind me of which page you're on, that's showing that report.
It is on page 7 in the actual document, but 8 out of 10 in the PDF.
Oh, because because the University of Phoenix has various campuses across the country, they in 1 year they were counting each campus as its own like institution, as opposed to like just University of Phoenix as a whole, like just one. So like in the next piece, it talks about how Strayer was in 1 year counted as one institution, and then the next time they did it in this last report, they were counted as 18. So that's why the numbers shift so quickly in some ways. So it's not that there was a lot of like exponential growth. It's more that they went from how they counted changed. So the numbers fluctuated. So yeah, there wasn't like, I don't know what that would even look like, from 89 to 100 or 1,000 or 1,600 in that chart. It's like it didn't just like 400% growth. It's more that they went from counting as single entities to entities based on like their campus base or campus sites.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the next piece, I'm gonna, again, break us into groups again and really just kind of explore how this system plays out. Because one of the questions that came up in our first activity around what we want to know, we talked a little bit about funding and resource allocation. And so in the UNC system of our four-year institutions, or the NC system, excuse me, for four-year institutions, we base some of those decisions based on the Carnegie classification, which is problematic for so many reasons, which we'll get into later. But I think it's important to see how this classification system really does impact things on a local level and also a systems level. So I should probably have posted this already. I apologize. So here you'll see in all of our 16 campuses, and what I'm going to have everyone do is kind of look at the mission statements for a small group of these, and then we'll do also going to the Carnegie system and looking at their classification and how they are ranked. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break into 5 groups. And remind me again, when you all are in your breakout rooms, can you see like a breakout room number? Yes, okay, cool. So breakout group 1, you're going to look at schools 1 through 4 in this list. Group 2 is going to do 5 through 7. Group 3 is going to do 8 through 10. Group 4 is going to do 11 through 13. And group 5 is going to do 14 through 16. And I'll put that in the, I'll put it in the chat. And so that folks will have that as a reference point. And then I'll also post this slide so that folks have the links, but you might get to it faster before I share it out. So we're gonna, let me open up my breakout rooms as well. But I want you guys to just take a minute to look at, again, you're comparing the missions for your institutions in your group to their classification and seeing if you find evidence of, if they're listed as a research institution, is that reflected in their mission statement? If it's classified as more of a master's comprehensive or lower, does that seem to be the focus based on the mission? Like, is there congruence between what the institution is saying they're about and how they've been classified based on this system? So, does that make sense? Yes. Cool. I'll come around try to get around much more frequently, so as you guys run into questions, I'll be able to answer them more timely. And again, it'll probably be faster for you to like divide and conquer and hit up the websites for each of the institutions before I can post the links. So I apologize for that. But if you have questions as we go, just know that I'll be coming around. So yeah, off we go. Try it out. Amanda, did you get a prompt for, oh, there you go.